Did you know what is living inside your body that you have no clue about, like bacteria and extremophiles and all of these little creatures? Literally, they're just crazy. Look at them. Look at these things. These are the kind of things that live inside and on you. All right, they call them extremophiles. All right, and guess what? If you were the size of Typhon, all right, who is this guy right here, who is the dragon in the desert. This is the size of his head and his neck. He had a red flaring eye, he had a regular neck, he had all kind of, this is exactly how he's described in the ancient texts. And if he was this big, which is this big, from here is his head, I just showed you, and his red flary eye and his throat coming all the way down. This is the runoff of all the bloody stuff. He goes all the way across Africa, from here to here. It's over 1,100 miles long. Now, what would happen to you, to the things that live in you, which are those extremophiles? If you die, they're going to try to find a place to live, and the ocean is a good spot. So they swam through this stuff and headed into the ocean, and then they tried to find whatever they could eat out there. And a ship and a bunch of sailors was a pretty good shot for them. Now, this is not the only dragon, but 1,100 miles long. Think about how big the creatures in his body are. That is, hundreds of thousands of times, I'm sure. I'd have to do the calculation, but you're talking about things that are just astronomically large. Tyson, who I work with, he's got membranes that he's been looking at that are 6 feet thick. 6 feet thick. In us, you hold it up and you can look through it like it was like a piece of glass. It's so thin. He's got them 6 feet thick between the top and the lower layer of these bilipid membranes. This is, the sizes of the things have to be considered. Now, what are those parasites going to be like? They're going to be like whales and whatever kind of other things live in all this soup that's in this creature's body, digesting stuff, just like we have bacteria and all of that, parasites and everything else on us and inside of us. They're extremophiles. They live in these salts and acids and everything else, and they break it down and do that job. Well, when the thing died, all of that stuff stopped coming through. They had to go find a place to live, and the ocean was the best they could do. That's what this whole thing is about. That's why they're all over the world. They were seen, and when they went into the oceans, bang, there they were. And they were documenting them the best they could. And this wasn't that long ago. And everything I show, every single thing I show is on top of the surface of the earth. That fish is 100% on top of the surface of the earth. That dragon, 100% on top. All my stuff, I just went out and picked it up. You don't have to dig for any of this stuff. It all came from the Great Flood, and it was approximately 3,500 years ago, according to Velikovsky, when all of these giant creatures were destroyed. Now, I don't know how they lived, or what they did, or whose friends they had, or games they played, no idea. But these were the creatures. I've shown them over and over and over again. Dragons with beards sticking off them, with feathered headdresses coming up here, because it's Quetzalcoatl. And his feathers run all the way up the East Coast, all the way up to here, in what they call the Green Mountains, because feathers make things grow green, and these are his feathers. And this is identical to what he is portrayed like in the ancient glyphs, with his headdress, and he's spitting out this right here. And guess what this is? This is salt domes that are, there's no accounting for why they're here. And this area here is what's called an area of hypoxia. He spit this stuff right out into here. I don't know why, whether it just happened when he died or whatnot, but it's all over here, and it's flowing down from here down. All right, here it's only 100 and something feet deep. Down here it's like 5,000 feet. So it's sort of bubbling down. These are the creatures that lived here. Now, if you can't accept that, well, then that's good for you. That's what I say, good for you. And reality is what I'm looking for. And then trying to draw some conclusion after I make my decision about what really is real. Because if you listen to professors, they can say, oh, the guy's crazy. He's insane. Oh, don't even look at that stuff. Well, I think I've shown that it's just completely opposite. And the ones that don't look at it, they shouldn't be professors. They shouldn't be teaching anybody anything. If they won't do their own homework, well, they shouldn't give anybody homework. And I found that's the case. Not interested in doing any homework. We're interested in just reading to you what we were told to say, and then we're protected because we said what we were told to say. If we go, and medicine's just like that too. They can't go anywhere off the side of the tracks because they get sued. The same thing in the academic range. They go off one way or the other. The peers cut them off. So everybody is glued to a rail. Well, I'm not glued to any rail. I can say anything I want because I don't care. You cut me off, it doesn't matter to me. So I'm just a voice in the wilderness, though. They can make you stay away from the rest of the world. And that's what happens to me for the last 12 years. And I see that changing a little bit. And it's up to you to make a change. I'm doing my job. I'm spitting this stuff out like squirting like a hose. And it's time somebody has to pay attention to it, or they're just walking around in Disneyland and smiling at Mickey. That's about it. Okay, once again, my friends, preparest thyself for sea monsters. This is the American Museum of Natural History. Well, what is natural? Well, sea monsters. Everybody spoke of them. So I'm going to go through all this speculation down to what was written. Now, the mythic Kraken. Hundreds of years ago, European sailors told of a sea monster called the Kraken that could toss ships into the air with its many long arms. Today we know sea monsters aren't real, but a living sea animal, the giant squid, has 10 arms and can grow longer than a school bus. Well, that might be big to some people, but not to me. Sea monsters. On the 6th of July, 1734, when off the south coast of Greenland, a sea monster appeared to us. His head, when raised, was on the level with our main top. Its snout was long and sharp, and it blew water almost like a whale. It has large, broad paws. Its body was covered with scales. Its skin was rough and uneven. In other respects, it was as a serpent. And when it dived, its tail, which was raised into the air, appeared to be a whole ship's length from its body. All right, and that was written by Hans Egde, Norwegian missionary, later Bishop of Greenland. Now, I'm going to explain to you what these things were, and they are not silly. They're not silly at all. Here's discovering monsters. When the Europeans explorers like Christopher Columbus set out on their voyage of discovery in the 1400s, 1500s, they were literally sailing into uncharted waters. Very few ever went out there, and the ones that did very rarely came back, I believe. Now, sea monsters were a concern for them, and frightening rumors ran rampant. Sailors' tales were sometimes the only first-hand information available about the ocean animals. These stories range from accurate observations to honest mistakes to outright tall tales. Obviously, you're going to have a whole spectrum of, people. That's the way people are. They do it now today. They fake everything. They make up big statements that they can't back. I don't do any of that. I try to be honest and true and show what is true. and that I can support and back up. Anyway, so they have all these different observations. One guy sees something, another guy sees it a different way. That's honest. That's not a problem. When they start making up lies and stuff like that, that's a whole different story. Okay, even the most objective naturalist is hard to separate fact from fiction. Well, not now. My stuff is factual, and it's 100% factual. Now, the meticulous drawings of sea monsters in European natural history books from the 15 to 1600s reveal the overlap between science and legend at that time. Well, science didn't understand that legends had a lot of factual information in it. Now, the age of exploration was when all this stuff was happening. The period from the 14 to 1600s in Europe is sometimes called the age of exploration. Adventurers set sail from Western Europe seeking wealth, power, and knowledge. That's towards, well, anyway, to the west. Before then, Europeans who wrote and illustrated natural history books based them mostly on older books, often deferring to Greek masters such as Aristotle, but as a new view of knowledge arose in Europe, emphasizing first-hand observation. That's what we need now. Data from traveling naturalists became increasingly important. In this transitional era, an author might present a newly discovered animal on the same page as the mythical creature, because they were here then, and they were there still until they killed them all, basically. Now it says, don't believe your eyes. Many sincere sea serpent sightings were later debunked as cases of mistaken identity. Of course, they can debunk anything. Later, oh, no, that guy was crazy. For instance, several sea monsters' carcasses turned out to be partially decayed sharks and so forth. Yes, obviously, that's the ones they're going to stand behind and say, oh, well, you've seen my research, and there's nobody can deny it. And my giant human beings, 160, 170 feet tall, and DNA tested. So, think about that. Now, sea serpents unmasked. All right, several pictures of sea serpents on old maps appear to be based on sightings of the oarfish or ribbon fish. See, this is trying to make it seem silly, like it's just people are seeing things that weren't really there. Now, they actually did, in the Library of Congress, they had a whole big thing, the Library of Congress, talking about these ancient creatures on these maps and what's the deal with them. They had them from every country. Iceland, Greenland, all around that area, they were just loaded with them. And I can tell you why they had them. And I'll show you why they had them. All right, all I can take from it is these had to be the creatures that were living in the guts or parasites like ticks or fleas, that type of thing, that were on these gigantic creatures. I mean, 1,000 miles long. It's just astronomically large. They could easily fit into the body cavities and be consuming the food and creating poop, which the creature lived on. Exactly what the bacteria does right now. The bacteria literally eats what we eat and then turns it into poop. You can't eat a carrot and make it into a mussel, but you can eat a carrot and have a bacteria exude an enzyme which breaks all that stuff down into sodium and this and that, and your body turns that stuff into body tissue. These things were living inside these creatures doing that same function. They were bacteria, they were funguses, they were ticks and fleas, and but actually they were the size of whales and these gigantic sea monsters and these crazy looking extremophiles that could live in these salts and acids inside the creature's body, in the stomach, kidneys and all that stuff. That's what it does right now. Your body's exactly the same. If you died, that stuff is going to leak out of you like it did out of these gigantic creatures into the oceans. For you, it just leak out onto the floor or whatever. But you're going to find these bacteria and things are going to be in those effluents. Now, if they can get into the ocean, they can go find a place to live, and maybe they'll survive. But at a certain point, they wanted to go floating around all these ships, and they were getting attacked, so they ended up killing them all. Basically, that's what happened. And then, there's probably still some around. They say they wash up here and there. Who knows? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Because they dismiss everything. So whether or not it's true or not, who knows? But they still talk about these giant things washing here and there, And then they make a big joke out of it. Oh, yeah, that's like Loch Ness Monster. Well, let me tell you something. I found things that there's been more jokes made about in history than you could possibly imagine. And they were true. And they are true now, and I have proven them true. So laugh that one off, Mr. Huckster.